There comes a point where the smile, the charm, and the story being told no longer cloud your vision. You begin to notice the pattern behind her words, the unspoken motives beneath her warmth, and the subtle exchanges of emotional currency that keep the illusion alive. You catch a glimpse of her shadow, and instead of looking away, you keep your gaze steady. That's when the accusations arrive. Perhaps softly, you're imagining things, or sharply, you're unstable, paranoid, cold. But this isn't a genuine test of your intentions. It's a penalty for seeing what you were never meant to see. Carl Jung once cautioned, "The man who looks too deeply becomes dangerous." You didn't fall in love with a dream. You were drawn into a performance. And when the mask slips, when the highlight reel of curated images and charming moments no longer hides the truth, you cannot return to blindness. The realization is not fantasy, it's reality revealed. And when a man dares to name it, when he refuses to reinforce the facade, the backlash begins. Suddenly you are no longer her partner. You are the enemy of the myth. She reframes your insight as jealousy, labels your clarity as control, and paints your refusal to bend as proof of obsession. That is the curse. Your perception becomes her chaos, and the more steady your vision, the stronger her sabotage. When she steps forward to declare you obsessive or controlling, your instinct is to explain, but every word fuels her script. The ordinary man apologizes, pleads, says, "I just care." He believes explanation will heal misunderstanding, yet to her, explanation is guilt confirmed. Jung observed that most people see only what they wish. Few look beneath, and when you do, the punishment follows. It is the mistake many men make, believing that understanding equals connection, that truth guarantees freedom. But relationships are not always governed by reason. They are built upon unspoken currencies of validation, attention, and illusion. Seeing her patterns does not create intimacy. It threatens it. For when truth outpaces the carefully crafted projection, it is not welcomed, but resisted. Your insight becomes intrusion. Your honesty becomes a weapon turned against you. And as Jung insisted, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. That avoidance is the fortress you crash against. You think you're offering love by naming what you see, but in her eyes, you've become a judge in a trial she never agreed to attend. Clarity, for her, is not safety. It is exposure. It is invasion. It is vulnerability she cannot permit. And so, the very gift of perception becomes the crime for which you will stand accused. If this begins to echo your own memories, her words thrown back against your mind, her sudden coldness after moments of intimacy, her ability to twist your presence into accusation, then you are not broken, you are awake. But awakening is not relief, it is war. Because once you see, once you refuse to be her reflection, you step onto a battlefield where emotions are weapons, and silence is the shield. She cannot lose a contest she does not admit exists. And the moment you point to it, you are cast as the villain. That is the burden of clarity. To see is to risk condemnation, yet in that very condemnation lies the first step towards sovereignty. Stay with me, because seeing is not the end. The true power is in what comes after. The frame you hold when the script flips. This, more than anything, determines whether you remain trapped in her story or free to write your own. The moment you try to defend yourself, you step into the very trap she's laid. Every explanation becomes another thread woven into her narrative. You speak to prove your sincerity, but sincerity is irrelevant when the story is already written. To her, your defense is evidence. The more you protest, the deeper the hole becomes. The average man insists, "You're misunderstanding me. I only want the best for us." But such words don't soften her. They strengthen her position. Because once she frames you as the problem, every word out of your mouth can be used to confirm her suspicions. You are guilty, not because of what you've done, but because of what you've seen. Jung warned that the human mind resists what threatens the ego's illusions. He said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But rarely do people embrace that understanding. Instead, they project it outward. In her case, your clarity becomes her condemnation, and her accusations become shields against self-recognition. It's not that she fears you seeing her, it's that she fears you seeing through her. Because the moment you do, her emotional leverage vanishes. The drama, the withdrawal, the sudden affection that follows a fight. All of these tactics rely on you chasing, pleading, and reacting. But the man who sees the pattern cannot be seduced, guilted, or controlled in the same way. So she flips the narrative. You're called toxic. You're told you're too intense. She tells friends you're unstable, controlling, obsessed. These accusations aren't truth, they're strategy. They are her way of preserving the illusion she depends on. For if she admitted that your perception is accurate, her entire identity would fracture, the mask would burn. And no one burns their mask willingly. The irony is sharp. She asked for honesty, demanded openness, promised she wanted a man unafraid to be real. But when faced with reality, she recoils. Because, as Jung observed, people will do anything to avoid facing their soul. And her soul is the very thing reflected in your gaze. This is how the villain archetype is born. You didn't ask to play this role, yet it's cast upon you the moment you refuse to reinforce her projection. Suddenly your composure is coldness. Your distance is abuse. Your silence is evidence of guilt. Friends who once smiled at you now share in her whispered stories. Strangers absorb the narrative, secondhand. You become the villain not by action, but by perception reframed. And in that distortion lies one of the greatest psychological traps men face. Believing that defending themselves will fix the distortion. It won't. Because once the projection is set, the more you struggle against it, the tighter it holds. History has shown this pattern again and again. Consider Galileo, condemned not for falsehood, but for seeing too clearly and refusing to deny it. Or Socrates, accused of corrupting youth, when in truth he threatened illusions that upheld a fragile society. The pattern repeats because human beings, when confronted with truths they cannot face, turn their discomfort outward. They punish the seer. They brand him heretic, villain, toxic. The content changes. Sometimes it's philosophy. Sometimes it's politics. Sometimes it's love. But the mechanism remains. The man who sees too much is condemned by those who cannot bear the mirror. So, what do you do when insight makes you the villain? You do not fight for the role of hero in her story. You abandon the story altogether. Because the more you try to reclaim innocence within her narrative, the deeper you entrench yourself in it. She thrives on engagement, whether it's passion or protest. Both feed the projection. Only one path strips it of power: the refusal to play. That's where silence enters. Not silence as retreat, not silence as avoidance, but silence as sovereignty. The refusal to be drafted into a script you never authored. The choice to hold your frame steady while accusations fly. Knowing that stillness is strength. It's here, in this moment, that the ordinary man falters, but the awakened man begins to rise. When the storm rises, silence becomes your greatest weapon. Most men confuse silence with weakness, imagining that if they do not explain, they will be crushed beneath false stories. But silence is not retreat, it is sovereignty. It is the refusal to feed an illusion with your energy. Gandhi once remarked, "In the midst of darkness, light persists." In the same way, your stillness is not absence but presence intensified. When accusations are hurled and you do not flinch, you create a void where her tactics cannot land. She screams, she twists, she provokes. But your composure forces her to face the only thing she fears, her own reflection. History is filled with examples of this. Seneca, accused of disloyalty and indifference during Nero's reign, did not rant in his defense. He wrote calmly, with poise, never begging for understanding. His letters outlived the noise of slander, and his reputation hardened into steel. Jung himself faced condemnation from contemporaries who branded his work as mysticism rather than science. Yet he didn't bend his insights into easier truths. Instead, he held his ground, knowing that his critics' outrage revealed their own refusal to face their shadows. And even in the 20th century, men like Václav Havel, jailed for his refusal to submit to oppressive narratives, understood that silence can be a profound act of defiance. These figures did not win by louder argument. They won by standing unshakable while the tide of accusation broke around them. Silence works because it collapses projection. The more she accuses without response, the more she must wrestle with her own echo. Your absence of reaction transforms her words into a mirror. When she says, "You're distant, but you remain steady," she begins to hear her own detachment. When she insists, "You're controlling, but you stand calmly still," her own need for dominance stares back at her. Silence reframes the battlefield. Her emotional strategies require your participation, and when you deny that participation, her arsenal crumbles. This is why silence terrifies. It doesn't confirm her narrative. It dismantles it, not through aggression, but through refusal. Many men mistake silence for passivity, but silence with presence is active. It communicates more than 1,000 words could. It says, "You cannot define me. I will not bend to your frame. I exist apart from your story." That is why cultures across time have revered silence as a sign of strength. The samurai trained not only in combat but in composure, for they knew the calm mind could not be manipulated. Eastern philosophy often speaks of the unmarred mover, the one who shapes reality by not being shaped. When you hold silence, you embody this archetype. You stop being a participant in her drama and become the screen on which her fears play themselves out. And yet, this is the moment where most men fail. They believe silence is doing nothing, when in truth, silence is forcing the confrontation she cannot bear. Jung wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Your stillness creates that confrontation, because when her words no longer sway you, when her accusations no longer pierce, she is left alone with the shadow she has avoided. Your silence becomes her trial, her own guilt, her own shame. Her own manipulation echo louder when you no longer absorb them, and it is there, in that unbearable silence, that her strategies unravel. This is why presence is the real power. When she lashes out, you remain still. When she pleads for reaction, you give none. When she accuses, you stand unmoved. The storm rages, but you are the mountain, and that mountain cannot be toppled by names, stories, or social games. In the end, she does not fear your coldness, she fears your composure, because your composure unmasks her illusions. And once the mask is gone, her control disintegrates. Silence, then, is not absence of speech. It is the sharpest form of speech. It is the unshakable declaration that you no longer belong to her script. When you refuse to defend, when you choose presence over pleading, you undergo a transformation. You cease being the man scrambling to prove innocence, and instead become the figure she cannot erase. She may accuse, she may condemn, she may try to sell her story to others, but your silence turns every word into her own reflection. Jung explained, all consciousness is unconscious in relation to something, and when you hold your frame, you expose the parts of her psyche she cannot control. You are no longer the mirror she shapes. You become the mirror she cannot escape. That presence does not fade when the relationship ends. It lingers, haunting her, not because of what you did, but because of what you refused to do. Beg, bend, or break. Consider the patterns of history. Great men who stood in silence became more than individuals. They became symbols. Socrates, condemned for corrupting youth, refused to recant. His silence in the face of accusation transformed him into an immortal voice of philosophy. Martin Luther King Jr., jailed and vilified, wrote from silence in his cell, and those words outlasted the voices that condemned him. Even Nietzsche, rejected in his time, allowed the misunderstanding of others to burn around him. And in that refusal to seek acceptance, his ideas became timeless. The same principle echoes in your own life. When you remain unmoved under accusation, you shift from being a man in conflict to a figure in memory. She can rewrite the story, but she cannot rewrite your presence. This is why your silence terrifies. It reminds her of what Jung called the shadow, the unowned self that lives behind the mask. You are no longer a lover to manipulate, but a symbol that reflects her deepest fear, that her games no longer work. And long after she moves on, she will look into the mirror and remember you, not for your affection, not for your passion, but for your refusal to play her script. You become her unfinished question, the reminder that some men cannot be controlled. And in that haunting, you become unforgettable. Most men lose this chance. They argue, they defend, they beg to be understood. In doing so, they remain trapped as characters in her drama. But the man who does not flinch becomes myth. He stops being measured by her emotions and starts being measured by his stillness. Jung's final warning was clear. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. You did not ask her to accept you. You accepted yourself. And that act alone made you unshakable. That act made you the symbol she cannot extinguish. Never forget this. The moment you argue, you surrender the frame. The moment you explain, you concede her story. But the moment you reflect, you force her to face herself. That is the power you hold. Not in changing her, not in winning the argument, but in becoming the mirror that cannot be broken. And when you stand in that truth, unmoved, unapologetic, unexplainable, you step into a freedom that no accusation can touch. You are not here to be understood by women. You are here to make them understand themselves through you. That is why you are remembered. That is why your silence echoes long after the words fade. If this message resonated, let it stay with you. Do not carry it as bitterness, but as clarity. And if even a part of it cut through, then remain with this channel, because this is only the beginning. There are deeper truths to uncover, hidden codes in human behavior, illusions society demands you serve, and strategies to reclaim the sovereignty that was always yours. Subscribe now, because what we do here will not only reveal the unseen forces shaping your life, it will show you how to take your power back.